Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Esther Martinez. I'm the CEO and Editor-in-Chief at People Matters. Very, very excited to meet you all virtually today for this fascinating conversation around the great emergence of HR and work tech. We chose the topic of emergence because we believe it implies that we're in the midst of the unknown unknowns. We have only one approach of solving the challenges ahead of us, which is to continuously iterate, continuously learn, and continuously invite each other to go through really that emergence of best practice. We're way beyond what we could call best practices, and there's definitely not good practices we can refer to when we are looking at the future of work that's ahead of us. So this year, we've taken the topic and the theme of great emergence for our TechHR Southeast Asia, Asia's largest HR technology conference. And we're going to be meeting you all in the beginning of May for that conference. So today, we're going to be discussing the impact of some of those trends and the role that technology is going to play on helping us build that emergence practices for our organization. So joining us today, we have Jason Aberbrook, co-founder, CEO, Regen, Patricia Liu, board member and chief of staff at Razer, and Shashwat Kumar, Asia leader for Vice President, Allied Solutions. And I'm going to be introducing them in a minute, but inviting you all to quickly also let us know your name and which city you're joining us from. You can do that on your chat. If you're joining us on LinkedIn, you'll see it on the right side. If you're joining us from YouTube, you'll see it at the end of the screen. If you're joining us from our own technology, again, you will see it on the right side. So Jason is a global thought leader, analyst in the space of HR and workforce experience. He's the author of The Ultimate Guide of Digital Workforce Experience, and he seeks to broaden the executive mindset to rethink how better design and deliver employee services that exceeds expectations. So very warm welcome, Jason.
Esther, thank you so much for having me, and so excited to be joined by this esteemed group of panelists.
Wonderful. Looking forward to learning from you today, Jason. Joining us as well, we have Patricia Liu, recognized as the Singapore 100 Woman in Tech for the significant contribution in technology and the silver medalist of the best CX personality for customer experience in Asia. Patricia is the chief of staff and board member at Razer. So very warm welcome, Patricia, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Esther.
Looking forward. Thank you so much, Patricia. Joining us as well, we have Shashwat Kumar. Shashwat leads the advisory and cloud solution businesses for Asia for Allied. And with over 20 years of experience, he had the opportunity to advise several various Fortune 500 corporations. And Shashwat, your name is totally synonymous with HR transformation. So we're very excited to have you with us as well. Very warm welcome.
Thanks, Esther. Good morning to all. Look forward to this exciting discussion. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, the three of you. And I know it's very late for Jason, so extra plus energy for you for joining us so late in the evening. But we're going to keep you very, very excited throughout. Let's go. Wonderful. So great to see so many of you joining from around the region. Great to see so many of you from India, many of you from Southeast Asia, different countries as well. It's great to see the diversity that's coming. So what we're going to be doing today is we've prepared a series of questions, but you're not just a participant today. You're going to be actually an active voice. So we're going to be posting the questions on the chat as well. So as we're hearing the discussion and the question answered by Jason, Patricia, and Shashwat, we're going to be invite you to also reflect and post your own reflections and insights for every question. So as I post the first question, which is A1, is going to be posted on the chat as well, and you'll get the opportunity to answer the question yourself by just tagging your answer as Q1, so we know and we see your answers as well. And we'll compile all these answers, not only from Jason, Shashwat, and Patricia, but from all of you as well. And we'll really have this joint peer learning, because there are no one answer for any of those questions. So we want to make sure we do this conversation inclusively today. All right, so let's get started with the first question, which is really some of the trends that you think are most critical for organizations to consider as they're bouncing back post-COVID and redesigning the future for themselves. And it's an opportunity for many organizations to think afresh. What are some of those trends that you want to make sure that we consider when we design that future for our organizations. So, Patricia, you want to start? What would be the one trend that you want to leave with us?
I think that, I would want to, look at, how do we merge this whole physical and virtual workplace, Initially, when COVID first hit, everybody was kind of like scurrying back, working from home. We have, most, if not all of our workforce, working from home and a virtual space. Now we're starting to bring, the workforce back into the physical space. And all of a sudden, people are scrambling to look for meeting rooms because, meetings are still held virtually. The office is not the most conducive for calls, right? So how do we then transition and merge that different physical versus virtual workspace? And in terms of technology, how do we bridge that? That to me, is actually the one thing that is most important as we transition, as vaccinations take place and all that. How do we get people to actually, do that transition?
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Patricia. So that big question mark about how we may transition, and do we need to transition? And if we need to transition, how we may use technology. So you kind of brought that big question, which hopefully we'll find some answers as well.
And then the coexistence of both. How do you transition seamlessly from one to the next one? You know what I mean? In the office as well as at home, how do you do that?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Patricia, for that. Shashwat, you want to go with our second trend?
Yeah, so interesting. I will continue on a different dimension of what Patricia was saying. So one is obviously the tools and the workspace, how it's configuring. I think the other thing which has happened in this whole virtual working, I think somewhere we became more authentic. And it's interesting. There has been enough research going in Europe to say when you get your complete self to work, you are more happy, you are more excited. A lot of Asian organizations are, I think, still very more traditional from a workspace perspective, what to do, not to do. So now it will be interesting management of these two contradictions and how we merge that will actually make workspaces more playful and fun. So think of how our leaders will behave. Obviously, you don't expect everyone to be in shorts in office. But do we go back to old ways or there is a new middle ground? I think some of those, it's not only about dressing, it's also about behavior, how you manage things. And also, so that will be an interesting trend change which will be happening.
Wonderful. Thanks, Shashwat. So what I'm hearing you say is that somewhere remote has helped and flattened the organization almost immediately. And when we go back to office, are we going to continue with those flattened behaviors or what's going to happen behaviorally?
Yeah.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Jason, I'm coming to you with a third dimension for us to consider.
So Esther and panel, to me, probably the most important trend that I think for all of us to keep in mind is the trend around mindset. And the mindset that I'm speaking about is that of adaptation. And when we think about adaptation, the definition simply is unlearning. We've gone from Y2K to the year 2020. And during Y2K to 2020, we did some things, but we kind of didn't do a lot. We all said, hey, someday we're going to be virtual, and someday we might be remote, and someday we might be hybrid. 20 years it took us to go from Y2K, some of us remember that, others have no idea what I'm talking about, to the year 2020. Then all of a sudden we were put in this time machine, and here we are post 2020, and it's like, whoa. We've gone from talking about the future of work to what we all need to do now is talk about the now of work. Okay, and the now of work includes the things that Patricia said, includes the things that Shashwat said, but it's our mindset to realize that there is no talking about the future. The now is right now. People are not going to come back to work the way they did. Business has changed, workers have changed, work has changed. Our job now is to ask us and look ourselves in the mirror and say, how are we going to change? And that's the trend. The trend is we have to adapt.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm going to stay with you for my next question. But before I do that, I am reminded yesterday I had the opportunity to have a conversation on a similar lines, Jason, that you're referring to. And that leader said that humans are the only animals that have the opportunity to reflect about the past and learn from the past, but at the same time visualize a new future, a different future, which is what you're inviting us to think about. That don't get stuck into your past experiences, because you have the capacity to really reimagine the future and a new future. So connecting back to what Shashwat was saying, that we have an opportunity to go to new next behaviors and not the old behaviors as well.
You know,
So
and,
Jason,
and Esther,
go
if I
ahead.
could just add on really quick to what you said, that one of the keys to that visualizing the future is we have to do it with the word effective tied to it. And if we think about the word effective, that has stated outcomes and stated principles. Okay, so we don't just all go do a bunch of stuff, you know. And I think that Patricia said this very well, and you said it very well. There is no more like, hey, let's just benchmark and then let's all do the same thing. Our now of work is going to look different than your now of work, which is going to look different than your now of work. And that's really, really important to keep in mind, is that when we think through these things, we have to think through that effectiveness. We have to be very crisp, very effective. We no longer have time. I'm not saying people have been fooling around, but we have no longer have time to fool around and not have things work. This is way too critical of an opportunity and moment for this function.
So I'm staying with you, Jason, on you were talking about mindset, and mindset is like the fueling of this cultural shift that we have the opportunity to take. So how can business leaders and HR teams maximize that effectiveness or performance? And when I say effectiveness, I think you mean about innovation and productivity, all these words included, which is basically about helping the organization succeed at the end of the day. How so we may think about that.
Yeah, I'm going to go through very quickly 3 things. Yes. I'm going to do it very quickly. So first of all, Shashwat said something really fascinating about us as humans. The empathy, the human side of it is much more than ever before. Okay. And finally, we might actually treat people like people. I know that sounds weird, but like, hey, how are you? We're checking in with people instead of checking up on people. We're enabling people instead of monitoring people. So when we think about that, like the 3 key things I want to make sure we focus on are A, how do we design with humans in mind? And the humans aren't HR people, but they're our workforce. And make sure that we're designing with a workforce first model. Okay. The second, and that's, by the way, that's personas. Those are experiences. That's thinking about me as an employee instead of thinking about me as an HR practitioner. The second thing that we need to focus on as an organization is to realize that we are going to have to play offense and defense at the same time. Okay, so we have to keep, people ask me this daily, we have to keep the lights on, right? Like we don't get a pause, we keep the lights on and we transform. If you think about the concept of transformation, the breakdown of that word, it's a radical change. So a radical change to how we do work while we're working is not easy, but also it should be so exciting that you should it should exhilarate you. So the second thing is offense and defense at the same time. And then the third thing I'm just going to say is acceleration. Okay, acceleration. And if you think about the definition of acceleration, it's basically the pace over the impact. Pace over impact. Okay, and what we want to make sure is that we're using this time to accelerate, asking ourselves, what do we want to be great at versus what is it okay to just be okay at? So if we don't do those 3 things, design for our workers, we don't focus on that concept of acceleration, and we don't train ourselves internally that we're going to have to play offense and defense at the same time, what we're going to do, once again, is not take advantage of the opportunity ahead of us.
Yeah, wonderful. Jason, thank you so much. And I think we're going to be building out on these 3 things as we go through the conversation and inviting all our leaders listening to today. Remember, if you want to contribute, just hear the question and inviting you to also post your answer. And I can see many of you already doing so. And if you have any questions for the panel as well, please post that as well. because I'm going to be taking questions from all of you as we go along. So I'm coming to you, Shashwat, now on the role that technology needs to play to help us on these different trends we're discussing, and also accelerate what Jason spoke about on human-centered design, working on offense defense, and help us focus. And from mindset, how do we use technology to help us scale up that transformation as a technology, as an enabler? What will be the role that you see technology playing?
So, in fact, Jason led a great context to how technology will succeed, because tools have been there for some time, and Jason talked about Y2K to now. I think HR and what tech has literally merged in clients' mind. Today already, when we talk to organizations, they are already, many of them are thinking like that. It's not easy because as you think of a mixed model or hybrid model of working going forward, all organizations, Jason, to your points, are accelerating either positively, or organizations who are in a negative spiral, they are seeing the opposite effect. So fundamentally, we have to execute this in a context where successful organizations or not so successful ones will be either making pivots more frequently, or not so successful ones will be forced to change all the time. So that's really the background in which this needs to succeed. Uh, as you look at the whole thing coming together, it's actually moving to channels, whether it's Teams, Slack. So that's where all of it will come together. Product companies will discuss it differently. Everyone wants to own this front end, but as employee, I don't, it may not be the most effective thing, but what I'm given, and that's how my interactions will play out. For now, again, connecting to earlier comment, how to make it effective in this world, you will need to have alignment of purpose and a lot of trust and transparency. So going back to whole Jason points around, how do you engage with individuals that you tend to do right first go, then to correct? That will be the hallmark of organizations who collaborate well and succeed. Technology is there. The good thing is a lot of people demographic wise who may not have been comfortable with technologies, they have been forced to learn that. So people now understand, appreciate some of those. So it will be interesting thing. I think it's more behavior and mindset change which will enable this success. Tech tools will obviously then we be there to act as catalyst, really the infra layer and so on.
Thank you, Shashwat. And I'm going to come to all of you again on one more question on technology, because it's going to be interesting how we make sure that technology keeps us agile and not the other way around. So I'm going to come to you with a follow-up question on that, Shashwat. But before we do that, Patricia, you were sharing with us about the first trend and how we need to figure out and reimagine what would these new context of work would be. And I would love to invite your opinion about, as leaders like yourself and many of the learners today who are on the call, as we are reimagining this workplace, what are some of the non-negotiables that we really need to set into stone and say, well, these, we shouldn't lose the opportunity? What will be those non-negotiable for you to help us accelerate that transformation?
I think the first non-negotiable for me is trust. And it goes both ways, I think, with the pandemic, in a crisis kind of thing, people kind of huddle together and let's get through this, right? And having, this being a prolonged kind of a situation with this whole COVID now, a year, more than a year now, I think the trust is where we need to really address that. And actually, it was really poignant for me, when I was having one-on-one, and it's just, when you have prolonged one-on-one, that's where you really feel like, how do I get to be, more authentic? How do I reach out to the person, across from the screen to get that trust, right? And especially in a different time zone and all that. So I think, the non-negotiable is how do we build that trust? And especially, I was talking to a manager just this week, who literally broke down in front of me on the screen. And I just wished I could just, be able to reach out and say, hey, it's okay. You're just tired. Don't quit. You just need some time off and go and rest, right? So I think, the most non-negotiable, how do we build that trust, from a leader and be able to then, to get to the staff, and the same way the staff say, hey, you really appreciate me, and I can't give a pat on the back from here in Singapore to someone in California, for example. How do I am able to do that? And in the same way, the staff feels like, hey, you really do care, despite all that checking ins with me and all that. And nowadays, we were talking about it yesterday with Shashwan, right? I mean, meetings are relentless, one meeting after on the dot. And people look at you're available, you turn green and somebody calls you and all that. How do we, say that you're not on my back, on my case, you only call me because it's the work or whatever, but just say, hey, I'm checking in on you. How are you doing, really, So to me, that non-negotiable, because if we don't rebuild this trust, or at least make sure that we address this thing, and on a prolonged kind of situation like this, very quickly that trust factor will erode.
So trust is your big non-negotiable, and thank you for sharing some of the examples of how you may build trust, and you build trust with every moment of truth.
Yes,
it's not that
that's
you do
right.
one initiative to build trust.
And even very senior leaders, I get questions like, I'm not sure whether especially the younger generation, they know how to work from home? Is productivity up? Is there a way of measuring productivity in this whole working from home situation? And in the same way, during, come the annual evaluation, does my manager know what I'm doing, and how do they know, and how do I know that all this is factored into my evaluation and stuff like that? So I think that is really important that we actually address this during this time.
Thank you. Thanks, Patricia. And before I go to the next question, Jason and Shashwat, any more non-negotiables that you want to add?
My only thing to add to what Patricia was saying, I think it's super important to recognize many folks are acting as superheroes, and that's how this is happening. And this cannot continue forever. So as organizations, say, for example, configure savings on real estate, I think it's important to get the basics up. All our colleagues, even at the lowermost level, do they have right tools? How do you invest? Some of these basics need to be taken care of. Think of our topography, quality of infra. We need to start making those investments and not just look at savings as we reorganize workplaces. That's a super important thing, because long-term people will need tools and comfort to make it work.
Wonderful. Thanks, Shashwat. And just that proactivity, being proactive of how do I invest in what people need, so then they don't, they're able to be productive without the disturbance of infrastructure requirement. Okay, Jason, anything else before I move to question 5?
I love those comments, and the non-negotiable for me is trust and empathy that Patricia and Shashwat brought up. That does not just happen. Like, you can't say those are the non-negotiables. I mean, you can say those are the non-negotiables. That's cool. But the non-negotiable is that you have to design a workplace that allows those things to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have to make sure that your journeys and processes support those things that are happening. So Patricia's using words like evaluations. Do evaluations that are driven by HR people actually push trust into the organization? Most employees would tell you no.
Yep. Exactly.
So get rid of that stuff. Otherwise, the trust isn't going to be there. Mustafa asked a question I saw come in over the chat that said, is compassion going to go away? Are we going to have compassion fatigue? Is empathy going to go away? And I love the question, Mustafa, and I hate the question, Mustafa. It will go away if we go back to what we were doing before. It will not go away if we infuse it into our journeys and processes as a function. So to me, what's the non-negotiable here, Esther, is that it doesn't just happen. We have to design and sequence intentionally.
Wonderful. And I'm just remembering this concept about governing constraints and enabling constraints. So governing constraints being like structures which actually, like if you look at the skeleton of an insect, it's it's outside, it's not inside the body, so it doesn't actually enable the insect to take shape in different forms, and that's why insects are actually very, they look very similar to each other. And enabling constraints is really the skeleton. Like if you have a skeleton inside, like humans have, then we can actually do a lot with our own body, and we can take that body to different places. And I think that mindset, Jason, that you're talking about, HR moving from that governing constraint and saying, oh, this is the way to do things, and really not enabling the manager to take that team to its full potential. And how do we enable teams instead of constraining teams with words like evaluation or annual reviews or whatever it is.
I'm sorry, Shwashwat, go ahead.
So Jason, to your point, I think one thing which all of us need to recognize is now what we are talking is not an HR issue, it's a central business issue. So it's not about HR signing off on it, it's the complete C-suite which needs to sign off it. It's an imperative for the business and the organization itself. And that's where in our interactions, my first take is this is I will say a CEO and ELT level agenda. This cannot be just an HR agenda. So HR cannot be thinking of solving it in their silo. They need to be kind of taking it out first. If that doesn't happen, it will not get solved. So and it's not happening most of the time. That's my big concern here on Jason. It's a business imperative. It's central to the business itself. It's not really an HR imperative.
Yeah, Shashwat, and I love that. And what I want to say is that I'm just going to take your thing one step further or a little off to the side. It's a business issue, but it is a people issue.
Yeah.
And people run and drive and thrive what makes businesses. Okay? So as long as HR is in this for the people and to support the people that drive businesses forward, then HR is doing the right thing. If HR is in it for just the transactional nature of counting heads, that's not going to work any longer. So I completely agree with you. It's about business, but it's about people and about human.
So it's about people at the center of business.
Yeah,
if I were to put both
business. Yeah, and I did a question that just came in from Surya that I want to make sure I get to because it ties back to what you just said, Esther. Curious to understand your views on what you mean by designing a workplace that allows the trust and empathy. Yeah. What it means is not checking up on people and saying, hey, are you working today? I mean, what it means is not asking people once a year if they're engaged. How stupid. Like you would never ask your kid once a year. You'd never ask your partner once a year. Like it's building trust. Trust doesn't come once a year. Trust comes in continuous daily conversations. It comes in that how do you present things to people? How do you brand things? How do you make sure that if we get to technology, that the tools make people feel good? Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not about what they look like. It's how they make me feel. And so back to Surya's question, that's how you do it. It's intentional to make sure that all of these things together are creating a safe space.
Yeah. So Jason, I'm taking Surya's question and inviting Patricia's views on this as well. How do we help HR move from that governing constraints of evaluation and one-time year reviews and one-time feedback and one-time things that we used to operate into this designing for trust and empathy? What are some of the things we need to break and what are some of the things we need to invest? We'd love to hear your viewpoints on that.
Well, I'll start first, right? I think, that for personal or, performance evaluation, it cannot be a 1 year, once a year thing like Jason said, right? It must be pervasive. It must be part of the culture to constantly give feedback. It's a very human thing to do. Hey, you've done well and all that kind of things. And it must be intuitive, and very easy to implement. Sometimes I get a lot of questions and flag, because, it's just really, people literally write tomes of how to write personal evaluation, which to me is a joke, right? I mean, how do you motivate a guy? How do you build that trust? You can't really, you shouldn't be just, looking at this is just an exercise and a tick in the box, right? So it must be pervasive. It is ongoing. And it is while it is quantitative, it's also qualitative. You need to make sure that all those things are actually captured, and it must be imbibed in every individual to want to do that, to want to give that feedback, to actually help the person be better, to give feedback on what are the development kind of things that people can do. So it has to be more humanized, as well as a more natural way of motivating somebody rather than a check in a checkbox.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Patricia. And I'm going to take Lean's question about trust. And maybe I'm going to invite you to contextualize it in the role of the manager, because at the end of the day, it's going to be those moments of truth with my manager and with my team that it's going to give me that experience, whether I'm trusted or not. So organizationally, we've discussed, but what about the role of the manager and the role of the team? And how do we enable that trust to percolate at the team level? Happy to hear the viewpoint of the three of you. Patricia, go ahead, please.
Well, I think, it's just making sure, trusting that person, based on the track record, based on how the person function, that he will do the best jobs, and unless proven otherwise, I think, to me, I will actually have an inherent trust in the person, and rather than try to monitor and catch and control whatever that is happening.
Shashwat, you want to go ahead?
Fair enough. So, in fact, just connecting to the points earlier, I will say a lot of digital or experience, all the design you do finally comes alive. I will say a lot of peer interactions, but managers make or break it. So I will go back to a story when I was still doing more of HR consulting than technology. And I was doing this assessment with a very senior leader. And he was one of the top 20 leaders of, just imagine, a $10 billion organization. And he said, now I am disengaged, and he literally built the organization. So my whole question was, why you are saying so? He said, I worked with this manager for last 18 years. I loved him. I thought he always took care of me. I was out for a medical emergency. I got a call. I told him I'm at hospital. I have a family medical emergency. His just response to me was, when are you back in office? Once you are back today, let's connect. He said, this guy did not even bother to ask why I am there, because I am constant in office all the time. So I think, to the earlier points around empathy, think of humans as humans, and really drive it with all interactions is critical to trust, because it's all years of trust can go away with one such faux pas. And for all the negatives around the managers, employees want to be loved and trusted by managers. They look up to managers. You look at all research on learning, they give most credence to what managers guide them around, and so on. So I think the onus is more on the managers to build and drive that trust, and then the reciprocity will happen.
Wonderful. Thanks, Shashwat. Jason, last point, and we move to the next question.
Yeah, Esther, I want to answer the question, but I also want to respond to Shivika's, I hope I said the name right, concept about actual practices, and also answer the question about what you asked about managers. Managers, I want to, oh, that was some party music, Esther?
No, it's good. Don't worry.
Good.
We're good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Managers, this is a really important point. Managers come to work human. We make them unhuman, inhuman, inhumane, based on the processes and practices that we ask them to follow. Does that make sense? Managers are humans. Humans innately are empathetic. When we give people things, deadlines, sheets, processes, policies that make them inhumane, all of a sudden they lose that. So we're like, people say, well, what do we have to do to get our managers? There's a question here. Someone said it's understood that feedback should be pervasive and ongoing, but it's an ongoing challenge. How do you successfully move the accountability to the line manager?
Yeah.
Help the line. Don't make what you deploy about HR. Make what you deploy a tool to help the line manager. If you do that, then the line manager is going to feel ownership, and they're going to say, wow, this is a great tool to help me be a leader. All managers want to become better leaders. They want to combine the human that they bring to work, combined with what they want, which is to be a better leader. What they oftentimes get constrained with is when we give them so much stuff to do in order to comply, combined with their day job, that they don't have time to be humans. And if that happens right now, we're going to find that that's going to make or break organizations' turnover and attrition, because people will leave if they're still treated like numbers instead of treated like humans.
So there's a follow-up question from Ashish about how do we take care of engagement of leaders? And we always think about leaders being, or managers being the linchpin or what we have to work on, but we also need to work on their experience. And Jason, you touched upon about how we make them less humane, but how do we build an experience for people managers so hence they can actually inspire their teams? What is it that we need to do?
So, you've heard me say this, Esther, and others maybe, is how do we design with the empty chair in mind? Right? The empty chair is the leader. It's right here, empty chair. It's the leader. When I'm designing, how do I make sure that I'm designing with them front and center? Hey, how is this going to make the leader feel when I do this? How is this going to make the leader feel when I do this? If you ask yourself that question and you bounce your processes, which are truly processes, not experiences and not journeys, but processes off that and say, I wonder how this is going to make the manager feel. You know how it's going to make them feel? Like they're getting something forced on them, A, and B, they don't even understand the language you're speaking half the time. So design with them, okay? Design with them, with their language, with what they need. Don't design for you and push something to them.
Patricia, Shashwat, any comments on the manager and manager enablement and really helping that manager to be that source of inspiration?
Yeah, so a couple of points. So I will just kind of summarize what Jason said earlier, is that I think the definition of manager classically in organizations need to change. We have set up wrong expectations. That's one. The other thing is, and this goes back to the earlier discussion, I think best adoption of new design or experiences is happening when you are involving leaders and managers upfront. And it's interesting because leaders and managers also manage their business through people. When you involve them, they give you the best insights to cut through the clutter. All the policy change which HR thinks is impossible, when a leader comes in and says, why do we really need this? What we need is these three simple things to do. Suddenly the change has happened. So Jason, what you talked through is so true. When you co-opt them early in the design process, that's the best chance of succeeding. And more often than not, people who are managing business through people, the leaders, they are actually keen to do the right thing because they don't want to get stuck in the bureaucracy. They want to run fast, get the outcomes. So it works that way better.
Wonderful. So should I move, Patricia? Any comments on the manager? How do we create experiences for managers?
I think, we need to make sure that, in the senior management, we make the managers own the people or the HR function. A lot of time is relegated to a function, a HR function. And when you ask, a line manager or whatever, HR is taking care of it, or any difficult conflict management, HR comes in and try to solve the problem. And you won't learn to be human as a manager or a leader until you really walk the road and you actually, feel the pain or, at least go through that whole human process in order to teach yourself to be human and to be a people person,
Wonderful. Thanks
Hey,
so
Esther?
much. Yeah, go ahead,
Can I
Jason.
add something really quickly? Surya made a comment here, and I just want to make sure that I address it.
Yeah,
to
on the
design
targets
with
and
them
deadlines.
or getting
Yeah,
their input. So I hope I didn't say that. I didn't say targets and deadlines are not important. But what I think it's very important that we do is we start to think about how do we talk about outcomes and impacts and not targets and deadlines. Okay, the problems with targets and deadlines is that a lot of people think it's just another exercise that HR is doing because they're just throwing it out there. And it's kind of when I'm working. I mean, someone asked for a real life example. I'm working with an organization right now who's trying to look at the merits of doing talent profiles. If you ask the workforce to do their talent profile and don't say what's in it for them, do you think they're going to do their talent profile? No, especially when they're already doing it on LinkedIn. Right? But if you show them what's in it for them and say the target and deadline is so and so that we can think about what job is right for you into the future, all of a sudden it's not we're forcing you to meet this target or deadline. We're showing you the value. And it's in the communication and the change and in that adaptation. And the one other thing I'll just throw out is that there's lots of feedback. That feedback word makes me squirm. And it's been in the chat so much, I'm feeling very squirmy. Most people don't like feedback. Most people like conversation. Okay, if I say to you, Esther, I've got some feedback on your scarf, you're not going to be like, oh, I can't wait to hear this feedback. Or if you say to your spouse or partner, I've got some feedback for you, more than likely that doesn't start with, oh yeah, it's great. It's usually a negative. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to think about how do I have ongoing conversations. Feedback in itself, and this comes from a great leader that I had the opportunity to work with, Marcus Buckingham. Feedback in itself is nothing. Feedback in conversation and context allows us to show what that can actually produce. General feedback, though, for the most part, doesn't add value.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Jason, for sharing that and clarifying Surya's point as well. So I'm going to invite you to think about this technology as an enabler. And when we're talking about remote tech or work tech, now we're talking about not only collaboration that Shashwat you were talking about, but also in terms of using technology to enable managers to get them access to the information they need to prioritize their actions. So what are some of the things in the emerging world of war tech that you're most excited about, that you think are going to really bring that change and that empowerment to managers? What are some of the things that you have experienced in the war tech space that is exciting you, that it's going to be a great opportunity for organizations to leverage on? Patricia, you want to start, or Shashwat, Jason? We love to hear the three of you on this question.
Okay, so for me, I'll start, right? For me, the most exciting thing is that with this whole, virtualization of the workforce, with those whole talent redeployment, all of a sudden, the barriers or the borders have been removed. And to, I mean, I sit on the board of Razer, and we keep looking, and even from my earlier days, we talk about moving from workforce. We're literally herding, people from one country to the next, work from one country to the next because of, cost reasons and stuff like that. Those are not the most important thing if you think of it, because it's the value that you lose, it's the talent. And all those things are not taken into consideration. Now, all of a sudden, with the workforce virtualization, that has been removed. The unimportant things are removed. Things like cost, things like time and space and all that is no longer there. And we really look at the essence of the whole human resource. And therefore, that actually is very exciting for me because it opens up a whole new thing. It can be an opportunity for some and a threat for others. But that's where we really hone into the essence of the workforce and to do good work, productive work, and look at the factors that are most important. And this all surfaces up. So that to me is the most exciting. I mean, it's still, out, the verdict is still out how this will pan out. But it is exciting because it opens up a lot of opportunities for me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Patricia. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Shashwat, you want to go next?
Yeah, so if you ask me, the most exciting thing is getting collaboration right for innovation, because businesses need to survive and thrive. And it's really people with all their diversity, when they come together with right intent, collaboration happens. And it's not a need post COVID. This need was there for long, and organizations have been struggling with that. What the whole disruption of COVID did, it accelerated many of those factors. Suddenly, across organizations, people are comfortable with those tools. They have now at least appreciation of how to work through that. What is synchronous? What could be asynchronous? I have seen now senior leaders saying, "Oh, this is not best done on mail. Can we do it on channel?" and so on. Going back to canvases, respecting that work, looking at the value of it. So I think there is this real opportunity of solving for collaboration. And this was a big problem even prior to pandemic. Any global company you talk to, their problem was, how do we drive innovation? How do you drive collaboration? There is an opportunity to use this moment and really make it happen and make it real. And everyone will love it if they get the right kind of voice and a say in driving that. So that's the biggest opportunity, maybe, from my perspective.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Shashwat. So we have access to talent pools and how technology can help us. We have collaboration, and I hear, Shashwat, I'm hearing you say equal voice, inclusion, in a way that everyone can be heard. And how do we use collaboration for asynchronous ways of working, which again connects with Patricia's point of talent pools. We may be in different time zones. We don't have to be in the same Zoom call. How we may reimagine collaboration differently using technology. Jason, your last point, and then I'm going to go for more questions from the audience. There are a lot of them coming in.
And so, Esther, my point might be a little bit, the days of having an HR strategy and a digital HR strategy are over. The function is digital, period, end of story. We can't say, hey, we've got an HR strategy, but guess what? IT's handling our technology. Hey, guess what? We've got this HR stuff, but guess what? Someone else is handling our technology. Technology is digital. By the way, digital is not technology. Digital is a combination of mindset combined with people, combined with journeys, and then the technology. Okay, so I don't want to answer the question, Esther, about just technology. I want to answer the question about digital, because too many people buy technology thinking it's going to change things, and it doesn't without a digital framework and digital mindset. And the first thing we must do is break the concept that HR doesn't have anything to do with technology. We're all digital today. We're all digital. Now, what's our WFH, work from here strategy? It's going to be different based on organization, but there shouldn't be a one strategy for physical, one strategy for digital. What should be our strategy for, compensation? There's not one strategy for X, another strategy for digital. It's one. It's one. And then the other piece of technology that I am so excited about going forward is data. Okay, and someone's going to say, dude, that's the most boring piece of technology in the world. And I'm going to tell you that none of the new technology that people talk about, AI, ML, blah, 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 does anything without data. Okay, so until we actually realize that the right data can do things like personalize, the right data can do things like drive different experiences. The right data can allow us to push coaching to managers and leaders that help them. That concept of data, that's the golden nugget. And we've got so much of it. Unfortunately, our most important treasure is oftentimes the least important thing we focus on. We just let it be scattered all over the place where it's not usable. So digital and data, those are the two most important concepts to me when it comes to how do we leverage technology going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I can see, Shashwat, you want to add a point. I can see you ready when he said data.
No,
Go ahead,
so
please.
on data, I love what Jason said is that when people do experience, they do digital, they forget data because unless until you have discipline of data, it's not an ongoing process. Because success, whether it's digital or the whole experience journey, anything you think of it, it's not one time, it's an ongoing discipline. That only happens when you are looking at it with a lens of data, correcting all the time. So Jason, great point there.
I love Lee's comment. Data is sexy. So that's Jason. I think our audience totally agrees with you that data is not boring, but data is sexy.
Well, and Esther, one more thing, because I'm reading some of the comments. I mean, Robin said, the right data, and I should have emphasized it. We all talk about data, you know what I mean? But the right data. How do we actually want to use data? Someone asked for a real life example. I challenged an organization yesterday. They're like, "Hey, we're having trouble getting people to adopt." I was like, "Okay, what's in it for them?" Ooh, And I said, "Well, what kind of dashboards and scorecards do you put out?" Well, we can't do that because we don't have the data. Like, if we had the dashboards and scorecards and those valued people, then you'd have people put data in tools. Okay, and one of the most important things about data that's so important right now is the only way that data gets in systems is by employees and managers. We don't have all these things out there, people doing data entry. The only way employees and managers are going to put data in tools is if the journey is sexy enough to get them there. Okay, we're having this huge challenge in this industry right now where people think, hey, if I design the right processes, it's going to help me. Great processes don't lead to great experiences. Great experiences lead to great processes, which generate data. And that's really, really important to keep in mind. Once I've got my data, then AI, ML, personalization, experience, blah, 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 blah. The world is my oyster. And by the way, notice I didn't say reporting once, which is why a lot of people think they should have data to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I have a lot of questions. We have only 8 minutes to go, and I want to make sure we have enough time for our final question, which is your word of advice for all of us today. And so I'm keeping the last 5 minutes for that question to go through the round robin. But there's a question related to experimentation, and all of the three of you spoke about innovation. The three of you spoke about trust. We spoke about, really enabling employees to come with their full self. And a lot of it is all about, do we allow for an opportunity to experiment, which really means how we treat failures and what do failures mean and how do we enable failures. So what would be your word of advice to create that experimentative context where people can come with their full selves, people feel that they're trusted to act, which means that they're allowed to make mistakes, and mistakes are considered as learning. So what will be your word of advice on that? How do we create that experimentative environment? Shashwat, you want to go ahead? Or?
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
a couple of things. A lot of time. So there are two different kind of ways happening here. A lot of organizations are building these separate bubbles where they are doing it. My challenge with those organizations is it has lower acceptance when it actually comes to the mainstream. And there are ways to enable that. I think it needs to be more of a way of working and culture where you actually you while you are doing something today, you need to be looking at a better way of doing it. And then going back to Jason's point, look at data, what it's telling you, what could be done differently. And there will be obviously, so this is really experiments, which is improvement driven, which will be more incremental, many of those. Some path breaking things will be really different. There you need to have, and then there are functions for that where product design, R&D will do it differently. But large part of the organization needs to have this really knack of looking at data, asking questions, and then saying, can we do things differently? I think that should be core to the culture, and it should be allowed at all levels. It's not about that only certain people can do it. And how do you get a voice to everyone to allow that? That's really the big shift, which could accelerate a lot of changes. And we have seen that in many industries are doing. If you today look at a lot of startups, technology firms, I will like Patricia to lean in how, for example, they do it. I think it's there. The change needs to go to the larger organization. So think, and there is this interesting book around phoenixes and the unicorn, and then they talk about how phoenixes will be the bigger story going forward. Because when this culture develops in a phoenix or a large traditional firm with all the other strengths they have, they will start making massive movements. So that's my input on that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, Shashwat. So should I go with the last question or any point on the experimentative, but very quickly before I go to the last question? Jason, Patricia, any inputs on building an experimentative culture, but just within a minute, Jason?
All I'm gonna say is that it has to be continuous, and it's a program, not a project. Two things. Continuous.
Wonderful.
And it's a program, not a project.
Not a project. Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. So, Patricia, I'm coming to you with the last question on, what will be your word of advice for all of us on this? And it's been a fascinating conversation, and I can't believe it's been already 50 plus 55 minutes that we are together. But as we close this conversation and you were to leave us with one star, one stop for us to enter into this new transformation where everyone feels that they can contribute and everyone can contribute truly. What will be your one star, one stop as we close the conversation today?
One stop for HR is stop looking at it as a marriage of all the different functions, whether it is recruitment, personal evaluation, all the different disciplines. Stop looking at it as different segments, right? And technology being another one, right? So stop looking at HR as a function. I love what Jason said, that HR is data and digital, but at the same time, we need to make sure that they can make sense of the data. They understand the people side of things. And to me, to start doing is that, instead of calling CHRO, we should call them Chief People Officers. And they are people officers. They have to make sense of the digital world. And, I have big data people in the organization. They tell me, they show me tons of data. And I'm also irritated when I see tons of reports as well, right? But at the same time, to be able to make sense of the data and tell me, from my experience, from the human experience, this is what we do. This is, from the practice of the people practices. This is how we can actually translate the data to something that is actionable, that's relatable, and that's intuitive to the managers and to the leaders who are using those tools, rather than, it makes sense to HR function. This is how we do things, right? And then you all of a sudden you actually do the change management, and you actually dish it out to the managers and the leaders. They are like, no, I don't do this on a day-to-day. How do you do this? And you know what? They're going to get someone to do all the data entry for them and all that. And that's not how it is supposed to be. It has to be intuitive. It has to be, people related. So if HR is just relegated to just doing the functions, somebody said that, is HR going to be obsoleted? Absolutely. If we stay, HR is going to be, just doing those functions. It can be replaced by AI. It can be replaced by, technology and all that. So HR is going to be obsolete. However, but the people practices will not go obsolete. They must make sense of, the practice and be able to use all the data to do something good for the organization, so that people feel people can be more productive, they can be more engaging, and they can be more human. Anyway, they spend more time possibly with colleagues and in the workplace than they do at home. So they can actually humanize the workplace. That is the greatest value of the HR function, or the chief people organization, Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Patricia. Thank you so much. Shashwat, I'm coming to you. One star, one stop.
So I will borrow Jason's word of now. So the start is, I think people have always, or if you look at HR and leaders, have parked the contradictions out. So in the short term, you will say, okay, this is bad for the culture, this is bad for experience, but let's do that. In future, we'll correct it. I think HR should stop and start taking that call now. That if it's wrong, it's wrong. Let's not make it happen. That, and I'm not saying it's generally true, but large chunk of fraternity is not doing that. From a start perspective, I think let's stop chasing the jargon and the trends, because talent marketplace is hot, so I will go and buy this technology.
Yeah.
Agile is hot, I will create squads, tribes, and lo behold, they will come and say, oh, by the way, my capacity has got reduced. Why? Because I have now created this agile team. Again, you have created a hard structure and you are saying your capacity has gone. So it's important to understand the mindset which will make it work, the behavior which will make it work, why it's needed for you, and then pick up something which is happening. So I think this jargon chasing needs to stop, because it's really dangerous now when you are doing it with speed.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Shashwat. And Jason, last one star, one stop from your side before we close to this conversation.
Yeah, really quickly. My start is that HR organizations truly have to think about how do they humanate. And there's some jargon for you, Shashwat. Humanate. But when I say humanate, there's, we're talking, and it's going to be very important over the next couple of years to think about where machines and people meet. Okay, and the way that I think about that is that there's three different body parts we look at: hands, heads, and hearts. What are people good at? Hearts work and some heads work. What are machines good at? Hands work and some heads work. So it's really important to think about, as a function, what do we want to leverage hands for, which is that repeatable, auditable work. So I want to start thinking about how do I make people and humans and machines work together. What do I want to stop? I want to stop putting so much weight on technology. We have, as an industry, the best technology in the marketplace today that we've ever had. Ever. Period. End of story. No one can argue with that. But we still implement modules instead of deploy strategies. We still measure adoption versus realizing that organizations have to adapt first. We still treat our technology like rocks, not like pets. So we have to stop that, okay, in order to really realize that our goal isn't to go live with technology. Our goal is to deploy a strategy. The technology is just there to fuel it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason, Patricia, Shashwat. It's been an hour of a lot of conversations. Thank you, everyone who's joined us. And I think you have made this discussion even richer as we were listening and reading your chat as well. Jason, a very good evening. Thank you so much for joining. Shashwat, Patricia, good afternoon, and have a fantastic rest of the day ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you so